All right, welcome back to another episode of the Morning Buzz with Russell's Fishing Tech. I'm your host, Russell Gahagan. This is actually episode 12, our second episode of the 2022 season. And today we got one of my good buddies that I've been looking forward to bringing on the podcast for a long time here, Captain Casey Prisco from Dirty Goose Sportfishing. Casey, how you doing today?
Good, buddy. How are you?
Good. How's the weather over there?
Today was actually nice, but it's been cold. I've done my best to escape it. I've been in Costa Rica and Key West a bunch this winter, so I've been staying in the warm weather.
Living the dream, as they say, right?
Trying. Somebody's got to do it, so I figure I might as well give it a chance and a shot. You know? Absolutely.
Well, Casey owns Dirty Goose Sportfishing, which is a charter business over on Lake Ontario. And if any of you have followed Casey, he's social media guy, does a great job with fishing reports and has promoted his business pretty nicely. So we're going to get right into it, start talking about kind of what Casey does. Casey's in my opinion, a very, very good, experienced fisherman with a lot of knowledge that he can share with everybody at home to hopefully help everybody catch a few more fish. And I've enjoyed my time that we've been friends and been able to get over there and do some fishing with you myself. So why don't you go kind of explain to everybody, you got your charter business, how many boats you have, where you're out of, things like that.
Yeah. I'm based out of, my pointer. There, Coop, you can say hi. It's my first mate.
There you
Cooper.
go.
He comes on all the charters. I'm based out of Mexico Bay, which is the far east on Lake Ontario. I run 3 boats. I have an 89 Tierra 31 open, a 96 Tierra 31 open, and a 2000 Pursuit offshore. The Dirty Goose, the Extra Dirty, and the Old Dirty. I have 2 great captains that run them with me. I got a really good crew, which makes it possible for me able to do what I do, year in and year out. Last year was one of our busiest years. We did just over 500 charters between the 3 of us. Starting March, I think we started March 17th and we stopped October 8th. It was a fun season. It was tough fishing. Started out tough with browns and it went tough the whole year. We just inconsistent weather patterns, changing conditions, changing temps, currents moving around, a missing year class of brown trout. You name it, we dealt with it last year. But that's fishing. I think the days that it's super, super easy, it's not as enjoyable as when you go out and you earn them. And I think that's with anything, in life. If you earn it, it means a lot more than if it's given to you. So we fish Mexico Bay, March, April. I leave a boat here, or 2 boats here this year on the east end. In May, I go to Wilson, New York, which is 12 miles from the Niagara River. We fish the Spring King fishery out there, which is phenomenal. Something to see. I know a lot of guys from Michigan come and see it. Ohio. It's when it sets up right, it's the craziest salmon bite you'll ever see. You can have 30, 40, 50 king bites in 6 hours. I think you've seen it, Russell, how good it can be out there. This past year, we had 10 days of no wind and scorching hot weather, and it made it tough. It was definitely the worst I've seen the lake this past year. It's the toughest, but I'm hoping this year's going to be a lot better, more consistent weather. They definitely stocked some browns, and we caught a bunch of those little ones and made sure they got back. And the salmon fishery looks like it's going to be good, and I can't wait to get on the water. I'm wishing the rest of my winter away and can't wait for March 15th. That's my splash date to hopefully sooner if there's ice off the river. But March 15th, I can't wait to get out there and start after it.
Yeah, it's coming fast. It's one of the things that I've sort of crept up on me. I was thinking about it when I was doing a video the other day. Because we've had such a mild winter so far, it's amazing to think that in my opinion, we're zeroed in on less than 60 days. And you just mentioned the March 15th date, which is pretty common here too, to be able to start getting out and chasing browns. We're less than 60 days already to go time. And if the weather cooperates at all, guys might be fishing in their smaller boats already here in, 40 or 45 days. So it's going to happen pretty fast. Let's start with that brown trout thing. How I met you, for those of you at home, is my wife and myself and my kids took a trip to New York, and we were visiting some of my relatives over there, and I wanted to get out fishing. And I know a mutual buddy of ours who I'll probably have on the show at some point, Andy Bliss, and I was chatting with him about wanting to get out brown trout fishing while I was there in March. And he said, well, I'm working with, this guy named Casey. We should go. So we ended up going fishing. We had a great day, and it was a ton of fun. I'm sure you remember that one. Caught a bunch of brown trout. Lily had a blast. She was little then. She's much bigger now.
She's tiny.
But as you saw that day, she was a fisherman, and she still is. So we had a ton of fun with that. But you start off the season on Lake Ontario with the brown trout deal, and brown trout are a big deal on Lake Ontario. I think that's one thing that maybe people at home maybe don't know if they're Lake Michigan people. You guys have a stellar brown trout fishery, probably, in my opinion, similar to Wisconsin's side of Lake Michigan's brown trout fishery, that you guys have a lot of double-digit days when fishing's good, of course. You can have a lot of double-digit days, maybe even 20-bite days or better. And I would say you fish them very similarly to how we do at home. Maybe just a touch different in the sense that I feel like you maybe fish them maybe a touch deeper. We're a lot of 5 to 15 foot. You guys are maybe that 15 to 30. And the one thing that you guys do a lot of over there in general that we don't do here is you fish the bigger planer boards versus the inlines a lot, or at least the guys that I've communicated with a lot. So run us through maybe your spring brown trout spread, talking about, how many rods you're running, how many are planer boards versus divers, what kind of boards. And then, I've talked a lot about recently, I've gone to almost exclusively spoons in the last few years because I've just seen a much better success rate for browns, but I know you do like crankbaits quite a bit as well, both. Yeah. So maybe take 5 minutes and just kind of talk about that, the program and what you do when it comes to spring browns.
Condition-wise make a big difference on my spread. But primarily I'm going to have, especially early brown season, I run 2 corner riggers. Most of them will be 50 to 70 feet back, sometimes shorter. I'll run 2 Chinook divers, which if you're not running them, you should. I know a lot of guys running the mini disc, Big John mini discs, and there's times I'll run them as well. I'll run double divers in the springtime for browns, depending on the conditions and depth that they're in. Most of the time we're going to see them. And the first thing is going to be anywhere from 5 to 12 feet of water in Mexico Bay. They will be out deeper too. But that's where I find that in the very beginning, that's where we do our best, that real shallow water. Speed normally is 2.5 miles an hour. And I'm going to run 5 board rods on each side. I'll run 5 one colors and 5 flat lines with different stick baits. I'll have some naturals. I'll have some gaudy, real bright, super bright and fire tiger looking colors. Spoons, same thing. And let the fish tell you what they want, and they will. I mean, you can put a rod out, and one rod will become an all-star, and then load it up. Give them what they want. They'll tell you what they want, and I think that's the difference in making a day something amazing or just another normal day. I mean, there's days that I remember last year, UV can't afford it. It was a spoon, and I had 9 of them in the water. And guys are looking at me like, what are you getting? UV can't afford it. Every rod had it. And my other boat, every rod had it, and they look at my tackle and they wonder why I have 10 or 12 certain spoons. This is the days like that is why. I mean, we caught a few other fish on other rods, but I think we got 27 browns the one day. And I'm going to think 24 out of 27 on the one boat were on UV can't afford it. Chinook divers, I'll run one with the UV NBK. And the other one I'll run with something gaudy. But I put them on a 2 setting or a 3 setting, depending on the conditions, and 10 feet out. Anybody that thinks browns are afraid of the boat, I'm going to tell you you're wrong. I have a video where within a matter of 5 minutes, 8 or 9 different browns came up and swatted at the spoon until the 8th or 9th one hit it. And some could have been the same fish. They disappear out of the camera. I had a water wolf camera. But without a doubt, they come in scents. When it's dirty, or even if it's gin clear, I like to use Atlas Mike's herring or Elwive. Herring seems to be real good. Me and Andy were out one day, and Andy works for Cold Steel come May. But March and April, every weekend, he works for me. And one day we were out fishing, and we weren't getting them, and it was chocolatey. And he brought a Chinook diver in and put the scent on it. And I'm telling you, it was in 30 seconds, and that rod went. So was it coincidence? We don't know. So we put it on the other side, and we put it on some boards. And the first 2 hours, we had no bites. The next 2 hours, we boxed out 4 guys and probably lost just as many. It was just unbelievable, the difference in the scent made. As we get into May, our temperatures warm up a little bit where those fish push off to that 20 to 30 foot spread. And that's when you start using lead cores like 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5 colors. I like to run 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 on the boards, both sides. So I got 10 rod spread on the boards. I run Big Johns with dual keels and 250-pound Power Pro, so they're true out to the sides. I like Big Johns because they'll pull back a little bit. I don't like a super, super stiff, like a Riviera board, or there's some other boards that pull super, super tight. I guess if you're walleye fishing, they like that. I don't like it. I like to be able to see it. That board, that rod will load up before it pulls off the release. We use Amish clippers. I can adjust them.
Before you get too far here, Casey. Hey, before you get too far, let's back up just a little bit. So when you're talking Big Johns, you're talking Big John otter boats, just so people at home understand what you're talking about. So you're talking about the board itself. The name of the board is a Big John otter boat, and you're using the Amish Outfitters clipper releases.
Clippers, yep.
Okay.
Now what I do is I set them. I use 10-pound test. In the spring here, it's gin clear water, even if it's dirty. 10-pound test, 10-pound leader. So I set the clips for the 10-pound test. A friend of ours, Jimmy Page, he takes his lead core, and obviously your backer is a little heavier than 10-pound test, whether it's braid or mono. You take a rubber band and half hitch it around it, and you can put it in the clip, and it works just the same. Yep. So you don't have to constantly change them out. So it's just a time-conserving thing. But so I'll run 10 rods that way. Chinook divers out 10 or 15 feet, or I jockey them. Sometimes if I get out to that 30-foot range, I'll have them 18 or 20 out. 2 mini discs, 30 to 70 feet back above them. I'll run all 3 riggers. I'll put some cheaters on the riggers. The middle rigger, I'll just run with a bigger spoon. I like stinger-sized spoons mainly in the spring. As they move out a little bit deeper, I'll start putting some stingrays on, or stingray-sized spoon. And then I'll run a lead core down the middle. So it's about an 18-rod spread. You can get tangled, but tangling's angling. There's a lot of days that spread, I think you have that much in the water, it brings the bite on. They see that much going by them. It's irresistible.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that, and it's interesting always to me when we do these kinds of deals, an episode like this, and we talk, so many similarities between the way that I fish brown trout and the way you fish brown trout, but also some pretty glaring differences. I prefer inline boards. I feel like, I want to be a little more stealthy. You definitely are loading up the water, and my natural instinct is to think that when the bite is on, you're probably going to produce more fish than me in a quick hurry. When the bite's maybe a little more of a stickler, I might be able to get a few more bites than you when it's a little tougher, spreading my stuff out, yada, yada, yada. But it's always interesting that, that in my opinion, when you talk to really good anglers, which I would say you are in that category of a really good angler, it's interesting that 75 to 80% of the of the stuff is going to be similar, and that definitely, that definitely is the case. So I find that interesting. So now I fish with you at a Sodas Point. So just from a reference point, is that what you're calling Mexico Bay, or is that a different area?
No, so Sodas from us is from Mexico Bay, about 40 miles.
40 miles, okay. So why did you fish Sodas Point then and now Mexico Bay?
When I lived in Pennsylvania years ago, I kept my boats at the marina there, and it was just the first place that I fished coming up there for browns. I kept my boat there. It was easy to put the boat in, and then I would take the boat out to Wilson from there because it was already west of where I am now, and then run it all the way back after Wilson. But I've fished just about every port on this side of the lake. I fished Oswego. I'm in Mexico now. I was out of the Salmon River. I fished Oak Orchard for a couple years. Wilson every spring now for 6 or 7 years. There's something about our lake. You're right with the brown trout fishery. Canada doesn't see it as much, especially the North Shore, the brown trout. Our South Shore fishery for brown trout is phenomenal. It really is. It's last year the amount of double-digit browns that were caught was unbelievable. And I think a lot of it was because we did have a missing year class. We weren't seeing those 3 to 5 pound browns that we normally see. Every brown we seemed to catch was 7+ pounds. I mean, we put our personal best last year was just under 20. That day, a good friend of mine right alongside him, he caught a 20, and my other boat had an 18. Ours was 19, and I think 19.65 pounds. And, Pat, my other captain, he had an 18 and change. But last year, we had 100 browns over 10 pounds. And that was, incredible. I mean, if I told you how many that got off that were that size, it was just, our fishery is amazing. It really is. So they can knock. Go ahead.
Let's talk about UV for a second, because you mentioned that, a spoon that was good for you last year was that Can't Afford It UV. And I wanted to bring this topic up because I think it's important. I've been promoting, this Super Pearl tape, which we all call UV, for, I don't know, it's got to be pushing on close to 10 years now. And I know when I first met you, and I don't even remember, I apologize if it was 2018 or 2000, I think it was 2017 maybe. So we're talking, 5-6 years ago, something like that. There wasn't a lot of UV going on Lake Ontario on that time. That tape wasn't very popular. There was not a lot of guys using it. I would even go to the extent of saying that from me through you and Andy and maybe a couple other guys that really got going as far as the tape on spoons and flashers go.
Sure.
Would you agree that that's the case, that that's really come on in the last few years? And also, how much of your flashers and spoons and tackle now is the UV, a pretty dominant part of it? Is it 50%, 75%, 25% of your catch rates now are coming on the stuff that's UV versus, sort of the old school dirty white boy and some of that stuff that maybe was more popular when I met you?
I'm going to say UV's definitely in my spread. It's always out there. There's days that they want it and there's days they don't. And it could be the change of it, in the morning and an afternoon. They want it in the morning. They don't want it in the afternoon. I don't know why that is. I think as a fisherman, we get caught up with our favorites. And if you have success with something, whether you're a charter captain or the guy that only goes on the weekend, you want to put something in the water you have confidence in. And if somebody talks about, hey, I was getting them on a UV, Can't Afford It, and you put one in the water and it works, that's now one of your players that's in your program. And do I think UV helps? Yeah, I think that shine, there's days that absolutely. But do I think it's more of us than anything else? Yes. That's the case with me. I mean, I'm a tackle junkie. I can tell you I probably have, I don't want to tell you, 5,000 or 6,000 spoons and maybe 3,000 attractors. And every year I have the same to-go box. And I look at it and I say to myself, why am I buying all this new stuff? 1, because it's custom. 2, because I think I need it. 3, because I want to try it, because am I missing out on something? But I go right back to my original stuff that I like and have confidence in. And I think I've learned over time, put the stuff that you have confidence in the water when it's a tough day and leave it there. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. When it's a crazy bite, don't try something new, because they're going to bite anything. It's the days when it's just a normal day where it's a slow catch and you're out there, and put a couple experiment rods out. Try something different, and that's how you learn these new things. I think if there was one person that did that the best, and he's no longer with us, but Kevin Davis, he always had an experiment rod in the water, and he'd tell you, hey, I was getting them on a blue bubble with blue meat for the first half hour. How do you know that? Why? Because he had so much time on the water that he kept it interesting. He kept a challenge to himself. Hey, can I figure something out? And that's how you become an innovator. And that's how you get that next hot rig or a few extra fish in the boat, and there's a few things that I've learned and seen and done, and some I've learned on my own, some I've learned watching others, and it's huge. It's huge.
Well, no
attention
doubt.
to detail.
Yeah, no doubt that it makes a difference on certain days, because obviously I'm sure you fished the regular Can't Afford It as an example many times. And obviously that particular day that you mentioned, they wanted the UV version, or vice versa. I'm sure there's been plenty of days where you've had the UV version out and the regular one's gone. So it's interesting how they pick they pick that out. But back to my experience with you brown trout fishing, and we'll wrap up brown trout fishing here pretty quick, but back to my experience with you, what I did notice was that there was a lot of similarities in the water and the way that we approach the water here versus the way you approach it there. We were looking for colored water that day. I remember we got into an area where the water got real clear and we didn't do real well. And then all of a sudden we found a patch of what I would call colored water. Some guys call it dirty. I think that can be a poor term. But we got into a batch of colored water, and all of a sudden, we started pounding fish. And then we got out of that again and had to circle back and get back through there to catch some more fish. Yep. And that's a real key when you're talking about spring fishing. You're looking for kind of this middle of the road water. In other words, you don't want it to be too dirty, like you mentioned before, or too stirred up, because you're probably not going to catch them if it's too dirty. But on the other hand, you don't want to gin clear either, because if you're in 10 foot of water and you can see the bottom, your success rate is probably going to go way
You're
down.
in trouble. You're in trouble on Lake Ontario when it's like that. You're in for a long day.
Absolutely. So after that brown trout bite kind of slows, or for this last year, as I followed you and some of the other guys over there, it seemed like it was pretty slow somewhat regularly. You and a few of the other guys, but you in particularly, seem to have found something a little bit different there when you guys started to go chase after some dinosaur-sized lake trout. Maybe talk about that early season lake trout fishing and sort of how you stumbled upon that and what you were using for gear, what type of rods and what type of, when I say rods, I mean applications, riggers, divers, boards, whatever, and what type of tackle you were using to chase after those lake trout.
It was probably 3 years ago, and we went out and we had 3 guys. It was Andy and myself. Andy was mating for me, and we went out, and within 2 hours we had an unbelievable box of brown trout. And we were done. And, and I said to myself, well, there's got to be something else we can try to target. And I had some divers on the boat and I had some cowbells. So I said, let's go out and see if we can't find a king or some lake trout. So we went out and started about 95 feet of water and just pointed it like northwest and just kept trolling. And we put out a couple lead cores. We were marking some high fish, 50, 70 down. I think we had a 10 color, a 300 copper, 2 divers, and 2 riggers and a spoon rigger down the middle, I think. And we went a little bit, and I think the 300 copper was the first one to go with an attractor. It was like a green chip and a green glow fly. And we took a lake trout. And I look over, and I had slowed down for Andy to net it, and the cowbells were bouncing. So I marked that spot, but we kept going, and little by little, we found, I think when we got to about 120 or 130 feet of water, there were a lot of fish on the bottom. So we switched right over to a complete lake trout, just 2 cowbells on the corner riggers, slowed right down, and it was magical, and there was no one else out there. It was quiet, and that was before I really did my reports, and we would get our browns and sneak out and get a limit of lakers for the guys too, a little bonus fishing. And I guess I want to be on the water as much as possible. So I hate when I got to come in early, or if we're limited out, I'd rather stay out if I could. If there's a limit to catch, I want to catch a limit for you. So we went out and found that there was a little spot, I guess you can call it an underwater reef. It comes up and then it goes back down, and it was just loaded with lake trout. It was like a little area, and we worked it over for the next couple months while we brown trout fished, and then left it alone and found that I'd go out there looking for salmon, and there was nothing there on the bottom. And that's when I learned how smart our lake trout are. 9 Mile power plant is right off in Mexico, like the point. And there's a natural lake current that heads north there. And that's the deepest spot, the closest spot to the deepest water. And that's where our bait winters. Well, these lake trout know this. And anyone that thinks they don't, I can tell you, try catching a lake trout where I catch them in the springtime. They're not there. Not the numbers. There may be a few stragglers still there. They come back there every spring and intercept the bait as it's coming in from the depths to come to the shallows and get that warm water discharge off the plant and then spread. And then as our bait spreads through the bay and then up the whole shoreline towards Henderson, those lakers follow that bait from out in front of the plant all the way up to the flats where we get them 16 miles north of the Salmon River, up towards the trench. They go right on up there, and then those guys up there start getting them. But it's amazing. It becomes a wasteland out there, how those fish know how to stay with the bait. They truly are a apex predator when it comes to figuring out where their food is. So we've fished them now 3 years, and this year there was the most people I've ever seen out there. Probably my reports didn't hurt or didn't help, but the brown trout fishing was tough. And you know what? People come up to catch fish, and if I can help somebody catch a fish, I'm going to do it, whether they're on my boat or on somebody else's boat or on their own boat. So I give a report every day after my my charter, whether it's 2 or 3 charters or 4 charters. I get my other captain's info, and I'll tell you where we were, what we used, and what we caught. And there's days you don't get them. There is. It's fishing. Unfortunately, that's part of it. But we got a lot of lake trout out there, and primarily we're running 2 riggers, sometimes 3. I stopped running the high rods just because we were going so slow and they weren't effective. But there was a lot of lake trout. We ended up getting our biggest lake trout I've ever seen this spring on a charter with a friend of mine and his wife and his son. And Andy had a guy that came up that asked to come fishing with us. So we combined them together, and I think we doubled. And my buddy's wife caught one like 12 pounds, and this guy landed one. We guessed it, and looking at it, I may be wrong, but it was close to 30 pounds. It was 28, 29 pounds. Never weighed it. Quick picture, got it in the water and let it swim. It's that fish is way old, and get it back in the water,
Yeah.
I got to let my dog out real quick. Hold on one second.
Yep.
He's driving me nuts.
Lake trout are definitely a unique animal in the sense that they say that they age to about a pound a year on average. So if that lake trout that Casey was referring to he caught was 30 pounds, that fish could be as old as 30 years old, which is awesome that he let it go. They're one of the only trout and salmon species, in my opinion, that you can successfully release consistently, which is nice because
it's tough here in the summer. I will say that. When we get that warm water, by the time they get up from 140 feet down, I don't think their survival rate's as good as we think, and a trout sinks. I always try to tell people, we can try our best to get them go, but you definitely have to take care of that fish, especially bringing them up. They're living in 39-degree water, and you're bringing them up while they're fighting from 39 degrees. Our surface here is sometimes 70, 72 degrees, and that's 60 feet down. That's a big shocker for them, let alone being stressed from actually fighting. So springtime, I think you can let them go absolutely, and probably most of the summer. But come fall time when that water's warm, I stress on trying to, if you want to target them, we should really, really, keep them. And you can let some go. If they look like they're healthy, they're going to go, let them go. But if you fought them for a while and they come in and they're stressed, it's best to take that fish. And I know people are going to disagree with me on this one. They're actually pretty good eating if you get the right ones. I've had them numerous times. I love them smoked. They're better than salmon smoked, in my opinion. And I've had them fish nuggets with them. I don't like the giant ones, 12 pounds or less. They're good. They really are.
Yeah, there's definitely multiple things you can do with lake trout. Smoked, like you said, is fantastic. In my opinion, they're the best fish to boil. A lot of people here do what's called a fish boil. White fish are good for that, but lake trout, I think, are even better. You're right. They're probably not, on the grill maybe as good as a salmon or rainbow or something, but there's a lot of things you can do with lake trout. I never turn one down. Matter of fact, I love when we do have a good lake trout bite, especially in that May time frame, like you just said, when you can dig them out of some cold water. I think you can even eat some of the bigger ones. Again, I wouldn't go targeting 20-pound lake trout to eat necessarily, but you get those 6 to 12 pounders and you get them out of 38, 39 degree water. They can be really good to eat. So you're using a cowbell with a spin and glow behind it. My two questions on that setup would be, how far from the cowbell to the spin and glow on average? And is your spin and glow plain, or are you using a fly skirt behind it?
It's about 30 inches, 28 to 30 inches. Spin and glow, my number one, and I have one left, and I've been after you. So I'm glad you brought this up. Lucky Charms. You did a series of Lucky Charms spin and glows, and it's the medium-sized one. It's not the giant one. It's not the second largest. It's the medium-sized, maybe double.
Zero. Yep.
Okay. That one with Atomic has coho flies, and I've used them TG, Hammer, White, 41 Ultra Green Glow, UV 190, Mirage. He has a few, but I had them, and our coho fishery, I like to run plugs for them, to be honest with you, and spoons. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to try this, and I put it down, and it was on fire. I'll still run a peanut every once in a while with a full-size Atomic fly. But once in a while, too, they don't want a peanut fly. I learned that last year. Captain AJ and Captain Pat figured it out. Couldn't get him to bite. One of the skirts fell off. The fly bit took so many fish, all the mylar was gone, and it was like 3-1. So we switched the other one out, and boom, they started going. And it was like they didn't want it. They were picky. But they've been fished to a lot. I think sometimes the difference in, when you're up there and there's 30 boats brown or lake trout fishing, and they've been doing it for 2 weeks because the fishing's been tough. They get smart. They get educated. They're not dumb. They've got to be that big. I mean, you think about a salmon, how many lures has swam past that fish? And he said no. And he's made it to the hatchery to go spawn, Yeah. There's a lot of anglers on the lake. There's a lot of lures in the water every day, So they're not as dumb as we think they are.
No, and I would agree with you. Actually, I think the lake trout's the most intelligent of all of them, mainly because they have the longest lifespan, right? So if you're going to target, and I've always said this, I think the hardest species to catch in a lake, technically, would be a 20-plus pound lake trout, just because he's probably approaching 20 years old, and he's seen it all, right? He's like chasing that monster buck that's 7 or 8 years old. That's, he's seen everything there is to see. It takes a little bit of luck, a little bit of being in the right spot. And sometimes I feel like, or a lot of times I feel like it takes having something maybe a little bit different, like a Lucky Charm spin and glow that not every lake trout on Lake Ontario has seen before, to catch them. So that definitely can be a big deal. So, all right, let's transition. So lake trout fishing's done. Brown trout fishing's done. We're moving the boat to Wilson. I've been looking forward to talking about this part because, in my opinion, you're right. One of probably the most premier king salmon fisheries in the country would be Wilson, New York, fishing the Niagara Bar, and that I believe it's all of May and maybe some of June time frame.
Yeah, I mean, they have a pretty good bite out there all summer long. Eventually, it becomes an offshore bite a little bit. They get a little bit deeper as that water spreads out and warms up. But in the springtime, I would say, even last year was April. It started early because it was warmer. April, May, June, and Wilson is tough to beat.
Okay, so let's talk about that type of fishing. So it's whatever, first weekend in May. You've moved the boat up there. I'm coming up there, and we're going to go fishing. What are we looking for? What depth ranges are we generally going to be setting up in or fishing? And kind of what is your general spread? Starting off, if you don't know anything, you're just getting going because it's the start of that fishery. Tell us how you would go and seek and destroy.
I'm not gonna lie to you. I love cut bait. I'll run a fly or two and first thing on a diver. But every rod's gonna have a piece of meat on it. I'll have a spoon on a middle rigger, and I'll run a couple of high rods like cores, lead cores 5, 6, 3 colors, with some spoons. But my deep rigger is going to have an oaky paddle and a piece of meat, Twinkies. Corner rigger is going to have an 8-inch chip and some meat. Diver, a deep copper, 400, 500, 600, 700 copper.
6 or 700? 6 or 700? So everybody heard that at home? A 6 or 700 copper.
Sure. Yep. Yep.
Okay, just wanted to make sure before we went on.
Clients like it, they're coming up to fish and getting shape at the same time. Armed day, So we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. They go home looking good for their lady at home. The biggest thing I would tell you is trust your electronics. You're gonna start 60 feet, 80 feet of water. There's gonna be some bait around. I mean, you could start right out the front door of Wilson. Sometimes you can go east towards Alcott. They're already there, and troll towards the bar, but you're going to look for the bait, and the fish will be spread out in different depths. I mean, you'll have a 3-color go with a mature king. You'll have a 150-foot rigger go with a mature king. They're all over. It's probably one of the only places I can say I did it one time on this end. 3 times in Wilson, I've had 6 kings on at once. And it's hell. I mean, they can hit 150 feet down before you get tight to them. They're on the surface because the temperature's right. You're fishing 39-degree water down 150. The surface is 46 degrees. They can go anywhere they want, past the boat, around your riggers, into other stuff. They're animals. You got to be on your game, and it's fun. The fishing out there, they're going to average probably 13 to 17 pounds. Some years they're different. Last year we seemed to see some 20-pounders, some bigger fish. It really depends. Every year's different, but there is definitely a huge number of salmon that show up there, and when they do, it's fun. It's you can get them on flies, you can get them on meat, spoons. Some guys get them on plugs. I've run a Brad's thin fin, and I like them for cohos. It's a red and black squiggle thin fin, and you have it on 10-pound test, and I'll put 2 on each board on the outsides, and when they go, I know it's a coho most times. Sometimes you get a steelhead, a rogue steelhead. Kings will take them. Last year we had a couple kings, and on 10-pound test, a 15-pound king, it puts you to it. It's
Absolutely.
fun. But it's just an unbelievable fishery. It really is.
So what depth range are you generally fishing? Now, I know that can be a wide range because in my experience, and I only have 1 year of experience going to fish a tournament there, the tournament day there was fish caught in 40 foot, and I know we caught them all the way outside of 200, but what's the general range?
Find that Niagara plume and stay in it. When I say the Niagara plume, it's kind of like the color of my hat, maybe a little bit greener. those fish are going to be in that. I found a lot. Your majority of the fish are in that with the bait. But like Russell said, I've seen the kings 40 feet, 35 feet, all the way out to 350 feet. You get the right conditions. There is no wrong place to be in the springtime in Wilson. I know boats go 12 miles to the bar. Boats will go out towards 30-mile point and come back, and everyone has salmon. Sometimes there's a line, you'll do a north. If you're not getting them, start doing a north troll. And when you hit some fish, stop and turn east or west. And, current out there is huge too. As you go west, you're a lot slower than you would. The natural current goes west to east. Your bait's a lot slower than when you're trolling east. You're hammering to get your speed to what you want. And some days they want it one way and not the other. Other days you can cut it on an angle. You play nice with the other boats. There's a lot of boats there. The lock derby's going on. So traffic's definitely it plays into it. And if you have a 600 or 700 foot copper out, a lot of people don't realize that that's out a pretty good ways behind your boat. 600-700 feet is, just a copper. You have 50-foot leader and 50 feet off the line into the water. You're 800 feet out there. Just everyone should be aware that guys are running it. Friend of ours, him, Rick Ajecki. He does very good on big coppers out there. Very, very good tournament fisherman. He's won a lot of tournaments out there, and those deep fish do bite.
Oh, absolutely. The long copper rods have been one of my go-tos for tournaments for many years. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things that I was going to sort of touch on that I found interesting when I went over there and fished that Wilson tournament, I think that's got to be about 4 years ago now, maybe, or so. Maybe you remember. Yep.
I think it was about 4.
Yeah, 4 years ago, we went over there with a buddy of mine. His name's Matt, with a boat called Line Tension. We hauled it over there. It was quite the undertaking. But as usual, you were willing to help and helped Matt get the boat in the water and get going over there. And when I got there, it was I talk about this all the time with friends. It was one of my most fun weeks I've ever had, because we boated 100+ kings in a handful of days prior to the tournament. Then there was a big north blow and it got tough. But the tournament day, I think we ended up taking
tournament day is always tough.
Yeah, I think we ended up taking like 9th or 11th or something, which I thought was really good considering the situation. But at any rate, what I found interesting was, if I remember right, I think that tournament is 6 rods. Is that right?
It was. It was 6 rods. Now it's 8.
Okay, so it was 6 rods, and we were trolling around with 4 boards and 2 divers. And I mean, people were looking at us like we were from another country. And in some ways we were. But what is interesting to me is that on Lake Ontario, and I find this as a whole, Lake Michigan definitely, guys run a lot more board lines, especially when we're after salmon, than you guys do there. And I think the main reason is you guys still have some color to your water in general, especially in that Wilson area. As you mentioned before, Correct. You're looking for the bloom, the Niagara color. Niagara River color, but even other places, I feel like other ports, I feel like you guys still have a little bit of color left in your water in general, where we are just crystal clear nowadays. So for me, on average, I mean, I'm probably running almost daily 6 planer board setups when chasing kings almost all the time. And even if I'm limited to a 9-rod spread, it'd be pretty rare that I'd have less than 5 planer board setups in the water. So in that particular event, we were running 4 boards and 2 divers because our coppers were our hottest rods. And I'm going by guys like Rick and yourself and other guys. And I mean, you guys have like 2 boards out, or there was guys that didn't have any boards out at all. I mean, they had 2 riggers and 4 divers out. So, and granted, some of them were the guys that did really well. So, but I found that interesting. Are you seeing that transition a little bit? I mean, are planer board setups becoming more productive for you, or more popular, or is it still, in general, kind of a rigger and diver fishery as far as kings go? In general,
I think first thing in the morning when the fish are hot, riggers are good. As the day goes on, I find I get more diver bites and more lead core or copper bites. If it's rougher out, I think the riggers help. Riggers play into a game a little bit. They seem to be more productive even later in the day. Starting in the morning, we start our rigs a little bit tighter to the spread, than I would later in the morning or later in the afternoon. Stretch it back a little bit. But they'll tell you, if your coppers are sailing off, stretch your lines on your riggers. If your divers are going, shorten them up. The biggest thing is listening to the fish. But I think, honestly, I think it's 50-50 still. I think, there's days that the board lines are slamming, and we find as the fish come down and start to stage, there becomes a time where our board lines are pretty much useless. Our coppers are dead, and it's all divers. We run double divers and short riggers with big paddles, and those days you don't want to board in the water. I want to be able to turn around and get right back on a pot of, staging fish that are there, with the board out with 500 feet of copper on it or 600. You don't turn too fast. I mean, you can, but it's a tangle, so it's, they all have a play, springtime brown fishing, absolutely planer boards. King fishing, Wilson, I run boards, I'll have a copper on each board. Sometimes I run a couple short lead cores. But I think honestly, like you said, I think we still have enough color that our fish, you can successfully target them with any method, rigger, diver, or long lines off of boards.
Well, I will say, again, this is about 4 years ago, but I will say I caught more kings. We ran one downrigger most of the week. We played with multiple, but we ran one every day except for the tournament day. And I caught more kings on one downrigger that week than I have probably any week out of Sheboygan here in 20 years, or pretty close, 15 years maybe for sure. It's been a long time since I've caught that number of kings, and it was on a big fish blade with a piece of meat. So without giving all your secrets away, why don't you share, maybe a tip, if you would, what's kind of a tip that you would give anybody about fishing meat at home? What would be a suggestion or a tip or, something that you could give guys? Because I think that's still, and it's probably going to be for a long time yet, but I know at least here that's still a rarity that, more and more guys are fishing it, but if guys have more than one or two pieces out at a time, that's a lot. One's probably pretty common. So what would be a tip that you could give guys for a weekend angler to give them a little more confidence in fishing meat?
Don't just put the piece of meat in the water. The bait heads are meant to be tuned. I know some of them say that they're tuned right from the factory, and some are. Some you can put in the water and they do what you want it to do. But the biggest thing I think I see guys do is they put the piece of meat in the head, throw it in the water, and send it down. And can you catch a fish like that? Sure. Everyone says, you ever catch a fish without a piece of meat in the head? Yeah, I have. Would I recommend it? No. I like the roll, and when I say the roll, I like it to see it kick. You put a piece of meat in the water and it's just spinning a million miles an hour, no good. I like to see it go around and kick, 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 kick. Like and to get that, I'll bend the head, I'll tweak it. There's sometimes 5 minutes before I put that piece of meat down, I'll bring it back in and I'll have a pair of scissors and I'll cut it. Even if it's a piece that's pre-cut, I'll cut it to make it so that it's doing what I want it to do. And it comes back down to a confidence thing. I'll have 10 rods in the water and 10 will have meat on it, and it sucks when you get that short hit or you get some skippies, but I love fishing meat. Last year I went through 2,700 pieces of meat. Seems like a lot. It is. It's a lot. I cut it myself. It's all herring and it's a lot, but it's what I have confidence in, as far as, where the hook placement is, I like to peg it with what I've learned is I take a bead. I might have one here. Hang on.
2,700 pieces of meat's a lot, but I will say that I think if there's one thing that everybody at home could work on for 2022, it would be to become a better meat fisherman. And even in myself, I tell everybody this when I give seminars, I'm a good enough meat fisherman to be dangerous, but I'm by no means an expert. There's a lot of really good meat fishermen out there that are way better than I am, and you're probably one of those. But yeah, what do you got there?
I don't know where I got to do. Okay, so this is a bead right here, and that's a peg it. Steelhead fishermen use them to peg their beads above their hook.
Yep.
So what I've done is I put that peg it in there, and now when I peg the piece of meat into this head, I take my toothpick, peg it in, and then I want the tip of that meat to be even with the end of this. So what I can do is move that bead wherever I need to move it, up and down, so that that piece of meat's right where I need it. There's no toothpick in the back of this where, you end up breaking that hole because you've jammed a toothpick in it. Also, this allows the bait head to spin without spinning the line. And I think that's big when I fish my meat. It's just a different presentation. It's not moving this whole Twinkie setup, even though you have a bead chain above it. It's not moving for that bait head to do what it wants to do. When it's bent and it's spinning that meat without having to move all that line. And you just get a little better action. And I think that's helped with my success with meat. And my particular role that I like, length of your cheater, your Twinkies is huge too. A lot of them run stock. There's some I run. This is, I don't know, I guess this one's probably 48 feet or 48 inches. I'll run some 6-7 feet long. And there's days it makes a difference, without a doubt, the hook you use, the liter pound test that you use is huge. Got to use what you're confident in. I tend to use lighter line than most. Do I get a lot of bite offs? Come fall, I do, but I get a lot of fish too, so experiment with it, but don't chase somebody else's fish. Don't chase somebody else's lures. There's something to be said about figuring it out yourself and doing it yourself. It's more rewarding. You can use somebody's information as a starting point, but I think what works for me isn't going to work for Russell, and what works for Russell isn't going to work for me, but it works for you, and what I do works for me. So I think that's the biggest thing I think I could tell somebody is go out there and keep it simple. You don't have to do what I'm doing to catch fish. I'm not the only one catching fish. You're not the only one catching fish. Figure your way out how to catch them. Maybe it's running inline boards like you like. Maybe it's double divers. But there's no wrong way and there's no right way. There's your way and there's the way that works for you. And I think that's where people get confused with, especially with running meat. The biggest thing I can say about running meat too, if you want some more tips on it, is keep it cold. On ice, brine it, Potski fire brine, borax, salt. You don't want it too stiff, but you also don't want it mushy, and I like scales. If it has scales, I'm more confident. It looks natural. That's what I can tell you on meat.
Yeah, no, I think those are really good tips, and I would agree with you on all of that stuff. It's one of the reasons you give reports and I do reports and do videos and stuff is to give people a starting point. What different tackle and different items are always going to, work differently for individual anglers, but it's also why I put out a video like building a program, because each and every day you should be building a program based on what's working for you. So for example, I might give a report and say chrome stud's my hottest flasher. Well, you might put chrome stud out and it might work for you, but live wire might be better for you or whatever, because you're like, okay, well, they want chrome and green, so I'll put out another chrome and green, and all of a sudden that's your hottest one. For me, maybe I can't get a bite on it, but the point is it's a great starting point. The thing that I found interesting that I think is important is I really think that bead is a great trick, because I think two common mistakes that a weekend angler makes when fishing meat because he doesn't know better is, number one, they'll put the hook in the meat, which I think is like an automatic no-no, because you're going to get a curled piece of meat, which is going to rotate and corkscrew terribly. Or number two, I see this all the time, and again, it's just people don't know any different. They'll have the hook all the way up at the top. So they'll get a bunch of fish that'll bite the end of the meat, but they won't, engulf the whole thing, so then they don't hook them. So that is a huge tip. I appreciate you sharing that with everybody. And, like I said, I've known that since I've known you. I know that you like to run a lot of meat, and so do I. It's actually one of my things that I really tried to work on in 2021, and I'm going to continue to try to work on in 2022, because I think if you want to be a really good all-around angler, you got to work on your weaknesses, and meat would be one of my weaker points when it comes to salmon fishing, where I would say flashes and flies would be my strength.
Spoons was my weak point, and I've definitely I've come a long ways with spoons. It was a hate relationship, but now it's they've worked their way into the program, and they definitely have their days. When it's when they'll take some key fish for you.
Well, we're getting towards the end of the show, but I want to touch on a couple more quick things. So we're through that Wilson bite. We've talked a little bit about that. Why don't you give us a 5 minutes on, your mid to late summer? Where are you going from Wilson, and kind of what's your program there?
From Wilson, I run the boat back down the lake, 130 miles back to Mexico Bay. It's mid-June now. We're getting the thermocline to start setting up. And I'm looking for anywhere I can find bait and 55-degree water or colder to fish kings. Good place to start is right off the Mexico Point, the plan again. Towards Oswego, that deeper water, you start finding some kings filtering their way in and out. Last year we saw a ton of steelhead. We had a lot of young bait, 2-year-old bait and 1-year-old bait. And our steelhead came out of the Salmon River and never left. I mean, it was the craziest steelhead fishing that I've seen on the East End in a long time. I mean, you were getting limits of steelhead out there. Guys were getting limits of them. They were just full of these little alewives, and they never left, until the bait left, then they left. But they were there for a month and a half, 2 months, and we got some kings mixed in with them. But the conditions, like I said, last year was just tough. The wind would blow out of the south and change the temperature 30 feet. The next day it blew out of the west and it'd move it down 50 feet. It was just constant changing and nothing ever really set up for us. Come July, I would say July is probably the most versatile month that you can target anything. I mean, you can start real tight for browns, 40, 50, 60 feet of water, find that 60-degree water where it meets the bottom and start looking for bait and browns, and you'll get a king or two mixed in there with the bait. And then slide out and get your Lakers and steelhead and kings. I mean, everything's around in July. Come August, we start getting our kings to show up in Mexico Bay, and you'll see them. It's like a wave shows up. Soda's fishing, which is 40 miles. They start getting them, and then Fairhaven starts saying they got some kings showing up pretty good, and then Oswego, and then we'll get a big west blow, and Mexico Bay will load up with the fish that are going to come stage and spawn, in the river, Salmon River. And when that happens, it's pretty magical out there. As long as we get the right conditions, the amount of fish that show up is unbelievable. It really is. Last year we had some of the craziest coho fishing I've ever seen. 130 foot down on riggers, we were catching cohos. The temperature, we had big south winds, and then it went west, and for like 2 days it went huge west, and our temp was 55 degrees down 122 actual feet. And if you could get your riggers down 122 to 128 down towards the bottom, it was on. I mean, kings and cohos, but the amount of cohos that were there was it was nuts. You didn't put board lines out. You didn't have to. It was 3 riggers and 2 divers and hold on. And that fishery really goes out there, that depth. It really depends on the wind. We were fishing 120 feet of water. We had a huge south blow for 2 days, and next thing you know, we're in 20 feet of water, chasing them with thunder sticks and spoons, and still run some meat in that tight, and they get pushed all around. It's crazy, but I would say, that's our fishery. I mean, you're constantly on this end because it's a westerly wind, the predominant westerly weather comes from the west to the east. It's a challenge. You're constantly adjusting. I have 52 rods on my boat, on each boat, I could be out there in the morning and have temperature down 80, and we get a winds come up out of the south. Next thing you know, that temperature's down 40 or 30, so I got to be able to adjust for that afternoon trip. So you got to carry the rods with you, but knowing what the wind does from a certain direction helps. And my one captain, Pat, he's very, very good one of the best at knowing what that wind does, where it puts fish. And that's another thing. Like, there's more to just going out and seeing them on your fish finder. It's knowing what happens. If I get a northeast wind, what's that going to do? Where's it push the fish? Where's it push the bait? If I get a south wind, what's that do? West, east, it all makes a difference, and it was a difference. The one day we were catching fish, but I had a guy that wanted a trophy brown trout, and we probably had 6 brown bites. We caught 3. We had 2 Lakers, and I knew if we had lake trout that, we had cold water come in. And I called Pat up, and I told the client, I said, I'm going to phone a friend. And I call him up, and he goes, you got to go on the other side of this point. That wind's southeast. You got to go on this side. We turned the boat around. We didn't go across the point, and we had doubled. We got a 13-pound brown. We lost 4 or 5 other browns that were double digits, and he ended up catching a 12-pound brown in the next hour and a half. just by his knowledge and knowing. I mean, we were catching fish, but I had no idea that with that winds, that's where I should go. He spent 18 years fishing that bay, learning the insides and outs. I'm fortunate enough to have him as a mentor to teach me, and I think that's another thing I can tell you is the minute you think you know it all, find a different hobby, quit fishing, because you never know it all. Lake Ontario, Lake Michigan, any lake, it'll humble you. You think you got to figure it out, you don't, and they'll show you that time and time again.
Yeah, I would agree 100%.
Don't be afraid. Your best fisherman.
It's taken me 30 years to dig a lifetime of knowledge out of my father, and he's been doing it, my whole life. So you're right. It's that mentor thing is important.
I was fortunate. When I started fishing up here, I fished with one of the best teams on Lake Ontario. I fished with Cold Steel. I got to fish with Screamer. I got to fish with Gene Delicati every weekend. I got to fish with Kevin Davis on the striker boat. I mean, I fished with all the greats, and I was fortunate enough that they opened up to teach me, to show me the inside scoop, the secrets, and there's a lot to it. I got a huge advance by being able to fish with those guys, and I'm forever thankful. I'm the fisherman I am today because of them. I was a nobody. I didn't know anything. I still don't know a ton, but I go out and I would learn every day I'm on the water. I'm learning something, and another great that's no longer here, Pat Comerford. I knew him well, but never got the chance to actually fish with him. He'd be the guy you'd see at the seminars listening. He's won every tournament on the lake, one of the best fishermen. But he said something one day, because you can learn something from the worst fisherman on the lake. And there's something to be said about that. Be modest. Be humble. Think about the lock derby. How many people come up, and I don't know if you guys have a lock derby. Our lock derby is top 20 fish caught and a grand prize winner. Well, I can tell you, I don't know the exact number, but there's a lot of people in that top 20 that aren't charter captains who are out there every single day, that aren't up here fishing maybe 5 times a year, and they're winning boat. So they're doing something. It's a cool sport if you sit back and actually think that you can learn something from somebody that's a newbie, because you can.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. Our tournament here is called Samarama, which is, same theory. Fished the lock derby when I went over to the Wilson tournament that time, and same sort of format and theory and same sort of things. So to wrap up the show, I just want to mention, because we've got sort of hitting that mark now, we've got a really nice show here, and I'm really excited for everybody to watch this. This is going to be a good one, and appreciate you doing it. But what I found interesting about Lake Ontario, and you talked a little bit about here in the end of the show about cohos and even a little bit about steelhead. My experience with Lake Ontario was that it was primarily a king and brown trout fishery, but it seems like the steelhead fishing and the coho fishing has come around a little bit in comparison to Lake Michigan, where, we definitely have a straight up coho fishery for months, and we have a phenomenal offshore steelhead fishery where you might, limit out on or have great catches of steelhead for months, in any individual port. Am I correct to say that probably hasn't been the case for Lake Ontario in the last 15 to 20 years? It's been more of a king and brown fishery, but it seems to be becoming quite a bit more multi-species as of late.
The hatcheries changed their stocking program with the cohos, and they're very diligent, and you know what, they deserve a lot more credit than they get. They figured out that our fall stocking of cohos wasn't good, so they've stopped the fall stocking and they've increased it in the spring. They've put the two together to make it spring. So one, that fish is getting bigger in the hatchery before it's released, and two, there's a lot of natural reproduction going on, which is great to see. We've always had a coho fishery, April, May, especially in Wilson. Come June, those fish, they go offshore, and most guys want, let's be honest, the king's the king for a reason. Most people want to target them. In Wilson, there's an unbelievable brown trout fishery there. Hardly anyone fishes them because there's salmon around, and that's the same thing down here. If there's kings around, people want to catch kings. That's what people want to catch. There are guys that want browns. There's guys that want lake trout. But the majority, I would say, if there's a salmon around, they want to target that salmon. And cohos show up, we see them, they disappear, and I believe they're out in the middle of the lake. Our steelhead, I see it in Wilson. You'll hear about them in the river in mid-May, and then it'll warm up, and then you start getting a few dropbacks. And the next thing you know, you're offshore because the water warmed up, and they're mixed right in with your salmon. But the same thing, our steelhead, most of them are in the middle of the lake. They're not really inshore unless we get some crazy weather that causes a tight break on the surface. Then we could target some steelhead and some kings on it. But a lot of guys are going to fish what's closest, and most times that's salmon, as in king salmon, or brown trout, than it is going offshore looking for cohos and and steelhead. When you fish a coho and steelhead program, it's a lot of rods. Most guys are running a big spread, almost 12, 14, 16 rods. You're running for cohos and steelhead offshore. Where kings, you're 8 to 10 rods, sometimes 12. Same thing with browns inshore, more rods, but you're not running as far. And I think that's why most people don't target them. But last year our cohos showed up, and they just kept coming and coming and coming. And they were some of the biggest cohos I've seen in a long time. I mean, the one day we went out and it was rough as hell. But we had 2 fish. One was 18 pounds, one was 19 pounds. I've never seen cohos that big. It was just an unbelievable year.
Yeah, those are definitely big cohos. Well, tell everybody at home where they can find your reports. I think that's a really good thing for people to follow, even if they're from Lake Michigan, again, because you might have something that's working for you that they can try, that they might find it's working for them. Goes back to what you talked about before, great starting point. But obviously for anybody that follows me or watches the Morning Buzz with Russell's Fishing Tech that's from Lake Ontario, how can they find you and how can they find your fishing reports?
Facebook every day is where you'll find my daily report. It's Dirty Goose Sportfishing. Every day I'll give a report. My website is dirtygoose-sportfishing.com. My link from Facebook goes on to that as well. I don't do a ton of Instagram. I probably should. I'll be honest with you, I don't have time or make the time to do it. As far as reports go, they're always honest. I'm not going to tell you I'm catching something on something if I'm not. I do live videos throughout my day. You can follow them. You can ask me and I'll give you an honest answer. I'm not going. There's no secrets with me. I don't care to have secrets. I can tell you, Diabolical comes over. It's a team from Michigan, very good fishermen. They come over and there's 2 rigs that they use: Black Slick, which is a black spin doctor with pearl tape glow on both sides, and he puts a Black Magic Twinkies behind it, and Kevin's Girlfriend, which is a dark green spin doctor, pearl tape on one side, blue bubble tape on the other, and he puts a Diabolical rig behind that. And those guys crush our fish over here on it. I've had 2 fish caught on that rig. I've used it probably 30 times until I sold them. I won't put them in the water, but they obviously catch fish, so what works here works there. And what works, anywhere has its right time and right place for it to work. That's just one of those rigs that doesn't work for me. Those guys have won a lot of tournaments over here on it and continue to do very good on it. And I know there's captains that run it that catch fish on it. I can't catch a fish on it to save my ass, but that's fishing.
No, you got that right, and that goes for everybody. It's a confidence thing, but that's why, to kind of finish up with something you mentioned before, as long as you don't ever feel like you know everything or you're willing to continue to learn, I think you can continue to become a better angler. I mean, I'm at the point in my life now, I'm 39 years old, creeping up on the big 40, and as a kid, my dad used to nickname me the Sponge because every time we'd go to a walleye or salmon tournament, I'd try to spend as much time as I could standing in the middle of the crowd just listening to everything I could get. And quite frankly, I was born with a silver spoon as far as it comes with fishing education, because I have who I think is the greatest Great Lakes salmon fisherman of all time. Of course, I'm a little biased, but I really do think he is in the conversation of the greatest salmon fisherman of all time as a father. And I could have sat at home and picked his brain every day, and I did. But you can dang well bet I picked everybody's brain I possibly could, including yours. You'll get the random text from me from time to time. So will a lot of the other guys. A good friend of mine named Scotty Richardson, who's a buddy of yours, Andy Bliss, all those guys. I'm not afraid to send them a message.
That Scotty guy.
Oh yeah,
he's Canadian.
Yeah. No, but I'll tell you,
in the eyes when you're talking to him.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Scotty's one of those guys that he's really helped me a couple times. This particular year for the Salmon Cup, which we won for I think the 7th or 8th time. Scotty and I had about a 50-minute phone conversation on Thursday pre-fishing, and he was a big part of of our program that we ended up putting together. Just some conversation, just some advice. Scotty, this is what I'm seeing. Sure. This is what I think. And he kind of just backed it up and said, yeah, that's what I'd be doing. And that's what we did. So, but long story short, I think you bring a lot of good information. I've sure appreciated your friendship over the years. And this is our 12th episode of the Morning Buzz with Russell's Fishing Tech. And I'm your host, Russell Gahagan. Our guest today was Casey
Prisco. One more thing.
You go for it.
Check out Russell's salmon candy collection. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to be putting an order in with him. He's got some really good colors. He's definitely put his time in to make the right colors. So I'm going to have some. You should have some too.
All right. Well, we sure appreciate that. We're wrapping up this 12th episode. Make sure you look up Casey, Dirty Goose Sportfishing on Facebook. We have an hour's worth of packed information here, so hopefully everybody enjoys it. And we'll catch you next Sunday with another episode of the Morning Buzz. I don't know who we're going to have on yet, but we'll have somebody. Thanks. Good luck fishing.